Hi, fourth grade. I am so happy to get to be with you virtually today. I miss all of you. It's just crazy what we're going through, but I just can't imagine going through it without the peace that God brings, that Jesus brings, just the assurance that, hey, I've got this. It's all going to be okay. Okay, time for my task. When I saw that you were reading Streams to the River, River to the Sea, I was visiting with one of you. I was reading with you out in the hallway or something, and I said to myself, to whoever I was with too, hey, that my husband's family has a story that happened during that time. Real story that really happened during the French and Indian War, which took place 1750s, 1754 to 1763. And so I know this is going to be backwards, but it was actually made into a book. And it says the Jacob Hochstetler story. And it's his great, a whole bunch of greats, that was the first one to come over, an immigrant back in the 1700s. And so I just want to read this story about what really happened. And being a family member, I think it would be cool for you to hear about. Okay. So I'll need my glasses. So this Jacob Hochstetler's family were among the Amish settlers to first come to Pennsylvania in 1738. So I'm not going to read all of this, just kind of touch on it. They lived peaceably among the Amish settlements, and there were Native American tribes in the area. And in this book, they're referred to as Indians. Now we call them Native Americans, but that's what you will find. When the war broke out between British and the French, known as the French and Indian War, even though it was between the British and the French, one of their military tactics was to hire Indians as, I just lost my place. To hire Indians to attack, kill, or capture European settlers that were in enemy territory. The settlers lived on the edge of the frontier. They were the ones that were especially in danger. Little did the Hochstetler family realize that their peaceful life was about to be shattered. Would their faith in God sustain them through the greatest trial of their lives? So this is them on the ship that they came over on. Test of faith. Good night, be careful. Good night, echoed the young people as they left Jacob Hochstetler's farm to return to their own homes. They walked in groups or rode away on horseback into the dark night. It was September 19, 1757. The apple schnitzing was finished. The young people of the little Amish community had been to the Hochstetler's home to peel and cut apples. The apple slices that would then be preserved by drying and storing them to eat in the winter months ahead. They would get together and do work things as kind of fun. That evening had passed swiftly as they worked together, schnitzing the apples. Everyone had enjoyed the social event. The Hochstetler family was glad to be part of a church group that believed in brotherhood and helping each other out. But amidst the enjoyment of the evening was an underlying feeling of uneasiness. Stories had been exchanged of relatives and friends who had been attacked by raiding Indian bands hired by the French military, who would be the next target in their warpath. After the young people had left, the Hochstetlers blew out the light and went to bed. They were soon sound asleep. Here's a German prayer in the German language that would have been maybe up in their home. Ruff, ruff, ruff. The sound of a dog barking wildly awoke Jacob Jr. Something must be wrong. What was going on? Jacob Jr. jumped out of bed. He ran to the door and opened it cautiously to see what was the matter. At that moment, someone shot him in the leg. He quickly bolted the door. Indians! They were being attacked by Indians. Jacob Jr.'s cries of pain awoke all of the family. They jumped out of their beds and ran to look out the window. They saw Indians and 3 French scouts out by the bake oven. The family was terrified. Jacob's 2 sons, Joseph, age 15, and Christian, age 11, reached for their guns. They could easily have shot the band of Indians and defend their family. Though the boys were young, they were skilled marksmen. They'd often provided wild game for the family to eat. Wouldn't self-defense be all right in this desperate situation? No, boys. Don't take your guns, warned Jacob in an alarmed voice. Don't shoot. The Bible says we must not kill. We would not want to be responsible for sending anyone into eternity without Christ. But Papa, please, we must save our lives. No, we must love our enemies. We can't shoot. The boys reluctantly laid their guns down and obeyed the father. Now what? So Amish and even today Mennonites are a group known to be pacifists, which means that they do not honor, don't like killing, shooting, things like that. Suddenly, the family realized the house was burning. The Indians set the house on fire. The family frantically rushed to the cellar. What should they do? As the fire continued to burn, they thought of the kegs of cider stored in the cellar. Cider! Here is cider! As in apple cider. In desperation, they splashed cider on the burning spots of the ceiling to stop the fire from bursting down through the floor above them. What a night of horror! The day was now beginning to dawn. The Hochstetler family kept beating back the fire. The Indians left, thinking the family had all died. Everything was in ruins. The Hochstetlers had to get out quickly. They could not stay in their cellar much longer. The smoke was suffocating them. One by one, they crawled out through a small window. Mrs. Hochstetler had difficulty squeezing through the small cellar window, but they all managed to get free. You know what that means, don't you? Mrs. Hochstetler was a little chubby. But alas, their freedom and relief soon came to an end. They had not noticed the young Indian, Tom Lyons, in the orchard. The 18-year-old warrior had lingered behind and was picking some peaches. Tom saw the family outside and gave a shout to alert the others, like, "Hey, they're still alive!" Immediately, his Indian companions were back. Mercilessly, they killed the wounded son, Jacob Jr., and his sister and mother. Jacob's married son, John, who lived on a farm nearby, had witnessed the tragic scene. So he was the oldest, one of the older ones in the family, and he had moved off, married, and moved to another farm nearby, but could see the whole thing happening. He was helpless to come to their rescue. In terror, he hid his wife and child. Jacob's oldest daughter, Barbara, who was also married, was not at home, or was not at the home place when the tragedy struck. Imagine her grief when she heard what had happened. Jacob and his two sons, Joseph and Christian, were taken as prisoners. They walked westward with their Indian captives for 17 days. Now, this has a little asterisk here, and so I'm going to read what the little asterisk at the bottom says. Up here it talks about them killing the mother. Years before, the mother of the family had harshly refused to give food to some Indians when they had requested it. They drew a rude picture on the outside wall of the Hochstetler house as they were leaving. This may be why Mrs. Hochstetler was killed in a very cruel way. They scalped her, is what it says in another one of my sources. Earlier, I had to put this story together to tell at one of Dave's family reunions, and so I went online getting all these sources, and then later I found out that someone had actually written a book about it. So now I just read the book. Someone else did all the work putting it together, so that is great. It was a long, hard walk across the rugged mountains. Then they rode north by riverboat up the French Creek to Fort Le Boeuf, present-day Erie, Pennsylvania. Le Boeuf. When they arrived at the French fort, their Indian captors delivered them into the hands of the French military. What would happen next? Had they suffered so much sorrow and hardship only to be killed now by the French? Soon they learned that the French military had given them to the Indians. When they arrived at the Indian village, the Indians began treating them cruelly. Jacob and his sons had brought some peaches along, which they presented as a gift to the chief. The chief was so pleased, he ordered that the cruelties be stopped immediately. So instead of fighting them, they offered him a gift. Oh, hey, here's some peaches that we brought along. And that made him happy. Because of the chief's decision, they were spared from running the gauntlet, which means being injured and beaten. They had been saved from a lot of torture, which was their customary treatment of captives. The time soon came when Jacob and his sons had to be separated. Was there no end to their sorrow? Just before they parted, Jacob turned to his sons in a pleading voice, whispered, "If you are taken so far away and kept so long that you forget your German language, do not forget the Lord's Prayer. You know, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And then it's written in here in German. I can't speak German, otherwise I'd read it to you. But it's from Matthew 9. Christian and Joseph were adopted by Indian families and treated kindly. Jacob, the dad, who was older, of course, however, was often moved from Indian village to another Indian village. He was not permitted to know where he wasn't able to know his location. The Indians painted the white men's faces so that they would look like them. They pulled out Jacob's beard and cut off most of his hair, leaving only a crown on the top. They did the same thing to the heads of Joseph and Christian too. They made them change their Amish clothes for Indian clothes. The boys adapted to their new Indian lifestyle, but their father Jacob was never satisfied. He longed to go back to his home and to his own Amish people. He thought about trying to escape, but where was he and where was his home? Which way would he take? One evening, he saw some older Indians explaining something to the younger ones. They used a stick to make markings in the ashes. On a map, Jacob thought. They're making a map, marking what seems to represent streams and mountains. Jacob tried not to look too interested, but this gave him a slight idea of where he was. During the day, Jacob was sent out to hunt wild game. He returned to the camp every night. But one day in early May of 1758, he decided to make his escape. The warriors were on a raid, and only the women and children and old men were left at the camp. Now was his chance. They would think he was still out hunting. That night, he did not return to the Indian camp at Buckaloon, near present-day Irvine, Pennsylvania. Instead, he kept going. It was now 7 months since he had been captured. Jacob was cautious and ever on the alert so that he would not get caught. He traveled at night and hid during the day. He crossed streams and mountains. Finally, he reached a stream that he thought was one of the head branches of the Susquehanna River. He continued following that stream. It grew larger. A ray of hope penetrated his weariness and despair. Something else that I read when I was doing research on this earlier was that the way he was able to save up, he would come back different days without one bullet, and he was hiding them in a certain place so that he would have bullets in his gun for when he traveled. And they would make him account for every bullet. And so just now and then he would hide one so that he had this little stash for when he was able to escape so he could protect himself from animals. And not people, because they wouldn't hunt people. Kill people. Now Jacob thought of a plan. He would build a raft and float down the river. He built a raft with logs and tied them together with grapevines. Now he could sit down and rest his weary body as he continued his journey. Jacob was starving. Okay, this gets kind of nasty. He ate grass for food. On one occasion, he found a dead possum with maggots on it. He was so hungry that he ate it. One night, when Jacob was about to give up, he had a dream. He dreamed that his wife told him he was on the right way and that he should keep going. This gave him renewed courage. As Jacob floated down the Susquehanna River, he came near Fort Augusta, which is now known as Shamokin, Pennsylvania. Not far away, he saw a man watering his horse, but Jacob was too weak to stand and wave to get anyone's attention. He could barely hold up his right arm. James Bird, a British colonel who was posted at Fort Augusta, saw in the distance a floating object on the river. He recognized that it was a white man on a raft and rescued him. Jacob was given food and water and a place to rest. How wonderful it felt to him, because he was completely exhausted. He had been on his journey eastward for 15 days, with little sleep and hardly any food. For 4 days he had floated on this raft. It was now May 24th, 1758. When Jacob felt well enough, Colonel Bird took him by horseback to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He was examined by Colonel Bouquet about his captivity and escape. In June, Jacob returned to his home community. He thanked God for a safe return at last. After he came back, he learned that his former neighbors had sent a petition to Governor Dewey and had asked for protection against Indians. Councils were held between the whites and Indians to establish peace. A council was held at Easton, Pennsylvania from October 8th through the 26th in 1758. Governor Dewey and others had attended. They agreed to sign a peace treaty. One of the agreements that the Indians were to bring back all the prisoners and let them return to their families. Governor Johnson would receive them. About 3 years later, another council was held in Easton, Pennsylvania. Governor Hamilton attended that one. There was a different governor by that time. He said in his speech that very few prisoners were brought back, and the Indians had not kept their promise. One of the Indians' excuses was that the captives were content and did not wish to leave because they had said the younger brothers were okay. They had adjusted to that life, remember? The Indians, however, promised again to find and deliver their captives. They agreed to bring them to another council the next summer, which was held at Lancaster. I know people that live there. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in 1762. Jacob looked forward to the Lancaster meeting, hoping to reunite with Joseph and Christian, but he was deeply disappointed, for his sons were not in the group of delivered captives. So then they include minutes from the Indian conference at that time. This was from a journal. We call that a primary source. It was there, primary. The journal was kept by a Quaker merchant regarding his experiences at the Lancaster Conference. With the help of a friend, Jacob wrote a petition to Governor James Hamel to have his sons returned. A petition. I think you might have talked about petitions before. Get a bunch of people, sign it, give it to someone and say, look, we all feel this way. About 5 years had passed since they were captured and taken from home. Not long after the petition to Governor Hamilton, Joseph was returned. Jacob rejoiced to be reunited with Joseph. Now, if only Christian would be home too. Several years passed and Christian was still missing. Who could help Jacob get his son back? Maybe he could contact Samuel Weisler to help him. Samuel Weisler, at age 16, had been adopted into a Mohawk Indian family. That had been arranged by his father, Conrad, who wanted Samuel to become an Indian agent and interpreter. Surely he would help Jacob. So that he was adopted out to be able to help Indians and the settlers get along, be able to communicate with each other. So Jacob asked this Samuel Weisler to write a petition to Sir William Johnson concerning his son. Jacob fervently prayed that Christian would come home. So here is, kind of see this cool old-fashioned outline. One day when Jacob was eating dinner, he had an unexpected visitor. The stranger sat outside on a tree stump and waited. After Jacob finished eating, he went outside to see what his visitor wanted. The tall young Indian stood and gazed into the white man's eyes. Then he said in broken German, Ich stehe für Christli Hochstetler. I am Christian Hochstetler. Jacob was overjoyed. At last, Christian had come home. God had answered his prayer. Both of his sons were home. Would Christian want to stay with him and Joseph, or would he want to return to his Indian family? It was harder for Christian to adapt to the white man's culture and the Amish ways of his family and community than it had been for Joseph. He had been gone longer, of course. He could not forsake his Indian friends. Was he Indian or Amish? Besides this, he had to get used to speaking German again. Even eating at a table seemed strange. The farmhouse was gone, and his mother and sister and brother were gone. Would life ever seem normal again? It was a difficult struggle for Christian, but after he married his friend, Barbara Roop, it helped him through the painful adjustments. Yes, he would be a white man again. That makes it easier. Jacob and his sons could never forget the horrors of war. It completely disrupted their lives. Sorrow and suffering had come upon them because of the selfishness and hatred in men's hearts. The scars would always be with them, but they could choose to forgive those who had harmed them. Love had overcome evil. God would do the avenging of the evildoers. He would bless Jacob and his sons for not fighting back. God had faithfully been with them and shared in their grief. He had carried them in his arms as they walked through the valley of the shadow of death. Jacob and his family's faith in God had sustained them through the greatest trial of their lives. Their faith had been sorely tested, but if they would remain faithful until death, they would receive a crown of life in heaven. The end. And then the end shows some like Bible verses. And isn't this cool? And I used to read this to my 5th graders in public school too, just so you know. But really applies to us because we can talk about Bible verses and things like that. 2 Timothy 4, 7 and 8. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. And then a verse from James. Here is a map of the state of Pennsylvania. And there's a marker there. Oh, they included the families. It's backwards, sorry. But Ellis Island is for a time period where every family that immigrated to the United States on the East Coast, they would have to go through Ellis Island. So here is their certificate of this family of Jacob Hochstetler coming through Ellis Island. So then there's other tidbits. Why did the Amish leave Europe and things like that? And, I just want to show you one more thing. There is out there currently, if you visit some of Dave's relatives, we haven't done it, but some of his relatives have visited, there's a sign that said, this is where this took place. 3 members of the Hochstetler family were killed near this point. So they've got it, and this shows the hand-dug well from that time. So I just think it's really cool when people preserve history of things that happened. And it was really especially meaningful to us that we can relate to the French and Indian War now by thinking of this story having happened at that time. So I would love it if you have any questions about this. You all have my email, or you can ask your teacher, or you can text me, whatever. But anyway, I am so happy I got to read this to you. So I will come on again sometime and do some chapel songs. How would that be? I think you're all saying yes because you don't have a choice. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to your teacher for letting me be a guest. Bye.